known with Christopher. They wanted me to have that surgery when I was his age, but back then that was an 80. No, I guess an 80. That was a very new procedure. They talked about all these complications you could have. So I never, because Mom and Dad, they really couldn't afford stuff like that. So Christopher asked me, he said, "What if they get up?" He's asked me this 1,000 times. I said, "What if they get out here and they hit my brain?" That's kind of last thing. You got no brain. I told them they just took a jagged stick and ran it up my nose and started cleaning it out. So I got him prepared.
You can tell them they've got plenty of rooms. They don't have to worry about that.
All right. We're going to start our... Sarah asked me before she left, she said, "You got to make me one promise." I said, "What?" She was going to start Revelations back till I get back. I said, "I won't." So,
that's the only reason I came.
Well, so if that's the only reason you came, then...
You come back next time.
Yeah. You come back next time. So if I don't keep teaching on Revelations, you won't come back, huh? All right. We won't ever be back in Revelations. I'm kidding, Tanner. We all love you, son. We all love you. I'm joking. All right, go to Genesis. I have touched on Sodom and Gomorrah, I think, once here at this church. I'm not sure. But I want to kind of go back and look at some things that I was studying about today. Go to Genesis chapter 13. We're going to be kind of skipping around. Genesis chapter 13. And then go to Genesis chapter 19. All right, now, one of the things that, one of the mysteries of the Bible, there's tons and tons and tons of them, is where is actually Sodom and Gomorrah? Nobody's ever found it. It's been totally destroyed, just like with Nineveh. They know that Nineveh is somewhere near Iraq, but they don't have any. They can't pinpoint exactly where it's at. Just like with Sodom and Gomorrah. And I'm going to go ahead and let you know, Sodom and Gomorrah is not about the sin of homosexuality. That is not what that chapter is about. Okay? What Genesis is about when it deals with Sodom and Gomorrah is the reality of God's punishment, or the reality of God's judgment. And that is what that is really about. And how God can also judge those who are Christians. Just because you are a follower of Christ, or just because you're righteous, does not mean you will not get back into sin, or you will not have periods of sin. So that is not what Sodom and Gomorrah is about. I know a lot of preachers will get up and they'll just lambast on that sin, and it is a sin, and that sin is mentioned in Sodom and Gomorrah. Let me go ahead and state that. That is mentioned in Sodom and Gomorrah, but that is not what that whole chapter is about. Okay? Because it tells us in 2 Peter that Lot was a righteous man living among unrighteous people. So it is about how somebody who is righteous can get involved in sin and God will judge them. And it also is about God's judgment, God's holy judgment. And whatever you sow, that's what you're going to reap. That is what really basically that chapter is about. But if the only evidence of where Sodom and Gomorrah is at. Now, when you're dealing with Sodom and Gomorrah, there's actually 5 cities you're dealing with. All right? And they are actually found in Genesis chapter 14. There are cities besides Sodom and Gomorrah that is going to be destroyed. All right? And those cities can be found in Genesis chapter 14, verse 2. And you will see the cities there of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and you have Zerubbabel, and then you have Zorah. Those are the 5 cities that are on the Jordan Plains that are destroyed. Okay? So it's not only Sodom and Gomorrah that is destroyed, but it is also those other cities. So you can find that actually again in chapter 14 of Genesis, verse 2. Now, also what Sodom and Gomorrah is about is and you can write this down, it is a man who is weak in certain areas of his life. If a man is weak in his devotions, if a man is worldly in what he desires, he will be wrong in every decision he makes. If all you think about is worldly pleasures, if you have no devotion in your life, then every decision you make is going to be absolutely wrong. And Lot is a prime example of that. Lot is a perfect example of how you can get your eyes off what God wants you to do and turn your eyes toward the world, and eventually you are sucked in by the world. Now, I know a lot of people who are Christians who have fallen into sin, and thank God, God has brought them out of it and has put them back on the right track and put them back on the narrow way. And you probably, as a time in your life where you had got involved in sin or kind of got off into the world, and God has brought you back. And I know a lot of folks that have done that. I have been in areas of my life. Me and Chris have talked about that several times. There's areas in our lives that, we have been off in sin, and God brings us out of it. And just like with Lot, God does that if you're a child of God. If you're a child of God, He will allow you to get off in those sinful paths, but He will eventually bring you back and put you on the path of righteousness. Just like with the disciples, just like with Peter, He let Peter go do whatever he wanted to. And eventually he came back and he basically asked Peter those questions. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Well, feed my sheep. Now, where is Sodom and Gomorrah at? If you look in chapter 13, verse 3, this begins their journeys, all right? In chapter 13, verse 3, there are two towns that are mentioned. It is Bethel and Hai. Hai is the same town as Ai, and Ai is found in Joshua, chapter 7. The children of Israel go in and they fight Ai. It's a story that is found in Joshua chapter 7. That is the same city. Same, different spelling, but the same city. So if it tells us that they were standing between Bethel and Hai, this is going to be found right here. You have Bethel, and then you have Ai or Hai. That's going to be in this general location. Okay? Now, you remember also in Joshua there is a city that is mentioned that is probably one of the most famous cities in the Old Testament. It is Jericho. And you have Jericho at this area. Okay, so you have somewhere in between Ai and Bethel, you have this story that takes place. All right? And Abraham and Lot, which Lot is Abraham's nephew, they are standing there between Bethel and Hai. And they both have a lot of cattle, they have a lot of sheep, and you know how the story goes. There's some tensions between them. Now, what happens is basically Abraham tells Lot, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to separate. You choose where you want to go, and then I'll choose where I go. Which in actuality, Abraham should have been the one to get first dibs because he's older. Lot should have said, no, whatever you take, I'll take seconds. But Lot, seeing how he is, jumps on the deal and says, okay, I'll take first dibs, all right? And in verse 10 of chapter 13, this is where everything suddenly goes wrong. Now, one of the second things that goes wrong. Do you remember in the beginning of the story that God tells Lot to get out of your city, get out of your town, leave your kindred? But he brings Lot along. That's his big first mistake. Because he brings Lot, his nephew, where he should have left him. And that basically starts his trouble. Okay? And you'll notice in chapter 12 of Genesis, there are a couple of times that a word is used. And it is the word altar. It is in Genesis chapter 12. It is in verse 7. And it is also in verse 8. Abraham builds an altar. You'll notice that it's something that is very prominent in the life of Abraham. He is always building altars. Okay? And an altar, of course, is a place where you worship God. Wherever you worship God at. It can be a prayer closet. It can be windshield time with God, which is driving down the road. It can be in your garden. Wherever you worship God is your altar. That is where Abraham would pick a specific location, and he would build these altars and he would worship God. So tomorrow, wherever you find time to pray and to study and to worship God, wherever you're at that time is an altar. And those altars should be very prominent in your life. You should have altars in your life. Just like with Abraham, he has in chapter 12, he builds an altar. And also in chapter 2, chapter 12, he builds an altar. So Lot is continuously building altars. Also, if you go, I'll get into this in a second. Also, in verse 10 of chapter 13, Lot does something. He lifts up his eyes. Now, Lot is going to determine where he goes based on eye appeal. Okay? That is his determining factor of where he is going to choose. Now, if they are standing in this area right here, between Bethel and Ai and around Jericho, this, between the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, this little strip right here, where the Jordan is called the Jordan Valley. Alright? It's that area. Alright? And it says, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plains of Jordan. So we know that they are somewhere in this area, between Bethel and Ai. And if he lifts up his eyes, this is a mountainous region, he is going to see this Jordan Valley or this land of Jordan. So they are thinking that Sodom and those 5 cities are going to be in this general area right here. Could even be up in this area. They don't know specifically, but they think it's basically in this general area. Okay, so we're going to go with them for right now. Alright? He lifts up his eyes, and this is how he determines where he's going. Alright? And it says, and he lifted up his eyes and beheld the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like in the land of Egypt. Alright? And thou comest unto Zor. So there is another city that is mentioned. Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan. This is the area that Lot chooses. So if this is the plain of Jordan, this Jordan Valley, but from the Dead Sea all the way to the Sea of Galilee and over to this area, which is actually wilderness, Lot chooses this whole area. He's not picking out tracts of land or acres of land. He is picking out cities of land. So that is what Lot chooses, okay? Now, this is something that's real, and this kind of jumped out to me today. Verse 11, he said, Lot chose every bit of that. Now, you'll notice there's somebody that is extremely quiet in this conversation. And the Lord only speaks to one person when you're dealing with Abraham and Lot. Guess who it is? It's Abraham. He never speaks to Lot. Okay? It's always Abraham he speaks to. And in actuality, in the Old Testament, God only speaks to a certain few people. Speaks to Moses, speaks to Noah, speaks to Abraham, speaks to Elijah, Elisha, Joshua. He only speaks to basically a handful of people. He doesn't talk a whole bunch to a group of people. It is to a specific person. Okay? So Abraham is going to be able to speak to God now in verse 12. Which is, look what happens. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain. You have somebody that is dwelling basically out in the open with God, and then you have somebody that has chose, I'm going to go live in the city. All right? And pitched his tent towards Sodom. So you have this area right here between Bethel and Ai. Lot is going to choose this area right here. Of course, Abraham's going to get Canaan. Okay? And that still belongs to the Jews, despite what the UN has said. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, dwelled Lot. Now look, verse 13, but the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. All right, so we know that is one of their sins. They are sinners and they are wicked right before the eyes of God exceedingly. So this is the type of people that Lot has chose to be around. Okay? It's neat that, or it's not neat, but it's really sad that he's going to separate himself from somebody that is going to be the father of the Jews. Okay? From the loins of Abraham come nations, come people, thousands, millions, just still today. Lot decides, I don't want, he basically says we've got to separate ourselves. But what Lot does, he does that in 2 ways. He separates himself from Abraham. He separates himself physically, and he also separates himself spiritually from God. So he's going to separate himself basically physically. Abraham never tells him, I don't ever want to see you again. Get away from me. He just basically says, listen, you need to pick you out a place to go, and I'll pick me out a place to go. We'll be fine. But Lot takes it a step further, and he separates himself altogether from God. So you can see how somebody who is a follower can do this. Don't want anything else to do with God. But eventually God's going to bring them out. But anyway, in verse 14, I want you to look what it says. And the Lord said unto Abram. We've seen a word that was in the chapter 12. It was altar and altar, right? God doesn't tell Abraham to do that again until he separates himself from somebody. And as soon as Lot is out of the way, then God is going to speak to Abraham and said, now I want you to build me an altar. And God said unto Abram, this is it. I want you to notice how this is worded. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, go away, since he's out of your life. Now you and I can deal with business. And now you see how God begins to speak. This is almost like, I know that we're studying the Last Supper. Do you know when Judas was there, Jesus Christ really didn't speak a lot about his future plans or their future plans with the disciples. But as soon as Judas left, Jesus Christ basically says, okay, now that he's gone, I can talk to you guys. And basically what God is telling Abraham is, now that Lot is out of your life, now I can start dealing with you. And he tells him to build an altar. Notice there's something that is not in the life of Lot. An altar. Okay? You see how just all he has done is he has started to look over there towards Sodom. It looks nice. It looks pretty. I've always heard that the reason the grass is always greener is because it's always built over a septic tank. And that is basically what it is like in Sodom. He looks because it looks like Egypt. And Egypt is always a type of what? The world. I want the world, that's what I want. It reminds me of Demas. Remember when Paul says Demas went back to Thessalonica because he loves the things of the world? So Lot decides, hey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here, I'm going to stay in Sodom. And God separates. There's always two. He separates. He says as soon as he separated himself, Lot chose him, verse 11, all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east and separated themselves, one from another. And Abraham, in verse 12, he dwelled in the plains. All right? Or he dwelled, and it says he dwelled in the land of Canaan, Lot dwelled in the plains. And notice how, in verse 13, what Lot has chose. He's chose to be around a bunch of sinners. And Abraham chose to be with God. And God said, okay, since you've chose to be with me, now we're going to start building altars. So we have Lot. Very interesting story. And there's also another altar that is mentioned in verse 18. So we have an altar in verse 18. We have an altar that is going to be built in verse 7 and also in verse 8. So all throughout the life of Abraham, he's always building altars. Always building altars. Now, we skip over Sodom. That's where Lot's staying. He's having a great time in Sodom. He's taking his family and he's down there. Okay? We skip all the way over now to chapter 18. You know the story. Abraham is sitting outside, and all of a sudden he sees some people that are approaching him. 3 people. Okay? And it tells us here in verse, let's look in verse 20. Now, the reason I got these verses up here, it deals with Sodom. Sodom is mentioned all throughout chapter 18, verse 20. Sodom is mentioned all in Ezekiel, it's mentioned in 2 Peter, and it's mentioned in Jude. Okay? Where we get our word sodomite, and I'm not going to describe what sodomites are, you deal with that on your own. We get that word from Sodom. So, Sodom, sodomites, all right? The word Sodom actually means to burn, or burning, or charred. That is what that word Sodom means, okay? So now we get to verse 20. And it says, and the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great. And we already know they're very wicked and they're very sinful. Is great, and because their sin is very grievous. That means hard to bear. Alright? So it is interesting when God describes the people that live in Sodom, y'all don't have to, back in chapter 13, verse 13, it says they were sinners exceedingly. They were wicked sinners, and they were exceeding. That means there is a line that they have. Let's just say this is the line that separates real bad sinners and then the worst of the worst. They're jumping over that line every time, okay? So what we have here is we have these people that are in Sodom that God describes them. There's no good in there at all. And then we go over here to chapter 18, and it says, this cry has come up because their sin is very grievous. Look in verse 22. Verse 21, I will go down and I will see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. Look in verse 22, and the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom, but Abram stood yet before the Lord. 2 went, 1 stayed. All right? You know this story, okay? And what Abraham starts doing is he starts interceding for Lot. Here we see a type of God. We see a type of Jesus, with Abraham. Jesus Christ is our intercessor to the Father. Still is. Abraham is going to intercede for Lot. Because he starts saying, listen, if you find this many people, you're going to destroy it. He basically says, first of all, you're going to destroy the wicked and the righteous together. And he starts trying to make a deal with God. And he starts interceding for Lot. If you find 50, no. If you find 40. And you know the story. And he gets all the way down. I want you to look. In verse 32, he said, let not be angry. I will speak but this one more. Peradventure, 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. All right? 10. Now, you got Lot and his wife, 3 son-in-laws, 3 daughters. That's 10 folks. He can go down there, and if those 10 people are righteous, he won't destroy that city. 10. Now, this is not a teeny little city. You didn't build cities with just a few hundred folks. There were thousands of people in this place. All right? Now, and the Lord went his way, and as soon as he had left communion with Abraham, and Abraham returned unto his place. Now, we get into the story. I want to try to hurry. No altar in Lot's life. We have altars in Abraham's life. Abraham, God visits with Abraham. Literally comes up, sits down and visits with Abraham. God doesn't do that with Lot. Okay? So you see the separation there. Always two. Always two. And there came 2 angels to Sodom and Eden. And Lot sat at the gate of Sodom. You should know this. Go to 2 Peter really quick. 2 Peter 2. Go to 2 Peter really quick so I can kind of explain what these verses are. These are mostly for me so I can remember. Second Peter. Find 2 Peter. All right, 2 Peter. I'll find it in a minute, guys. 2 Peter 2:6. All right, in 2 Peter 2, this is what it says. And turning, 2 Peter 2:6, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an example unto those that after should live ungodly. And delivered just Lot, that is also justified. Okay? If you're a follower of Christ, you are justified. Okay? Just Lot, vexed with filthy communications. All right? Of the wicked. For the righteous, verse 8, man dwelling among them, and seeing and hearing, vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. So we have somebody who is described as righteous. He is described as just, and he is Lot, and he is living down in this place called Sodom. And every day he is around these type of wicked, ungodly sinners. And you can see how it tells us in 2 Peter how this begins to wear on him every day, every day, every day. Because it tells us that it vexed his righteousness from day to day. So the longer he stayed in Sodom, the further he got away from God. Okay? So we know that Lot was not a bad guy. He just made bad decisions, and he has put himself in a position with his family. And not only did he get himself into this position, but also he has put his family in this position. What is the sins of Sodom? Go to Ezekiel chapter 16. We already know that there's one sin that they are guilty of. Go to Ezekiel chapter 16. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. I'm not going to get done. I have to come back to this later. Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Iniquity is another fancy name for sin. All right? Ezekiel 16, 49. Behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness was in her and her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. That was some of her sins. And they were haughty and committed abomination before me. You'll notice that the abomination comes almost dead last, doesn't it? Guess what the first sin of theirs is? Pride. God hates pride. Their first sin is pride. You get all the way down to abomination or homosexuality or sodomy, down in verse 50. So they're basically guilty of the same things that another city is guilty of that God destroyed, called Nineveh. So they are prideful, and it says fullness of bread. God gave them everything they could ever want. They had everything they wanted. All right, they were rich. This was not a poor city. They were extremely wealthy. They had everything they could possibly want, and they did nothing. They just sat around. That's all they did, is sit around. And it says, and they were haughty in verse 50 and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw good. Okay, so there are their sins. All right. Not only was the sin of homosexuality, but that is one of the last sins that he names. It is the sin of pride that we see first. Now go to Jude. Jude, if I don't get done, y'all can go do a private Bible study with this on your own. It's a real interesting study. Go to Jude chapter 7. We're going to see some more of her sins. Now this is the type of place that Lot chose. So we know that they're proud, we know that they're haughty, we know that they're full of, they basically got everything they want. They're idle. They can do basically what they want. They're abomination, and it reminds me of a church we're going to study about in the book of Revelations. And it is the book of Laodicea. Because Laodicea basically said, God tells the church of Laodicea, you got everything you want, you've increased in goods, you're rich, but you look at me and you say, I don't want anything to do with you. You're lukewarm, I want to throw you up out of my mouth. Kind of almost identical to Sodom. They're prideful, they're haughty, they don't help the poor, they don't help the needy. All right, now if you go to Jude chapter 7, only one chapter in Jude, even as Sodom and Gomorrah, here are some more. And the cities about them. Now the cities that he's talking about are those other three cities that we named. All right? They're going to be in this area right here. Okay? It's those 5 other cities that you find in Genesis, was it 13, I think? I'm not sure. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and as the cities round about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication. There's another one of their sins. Going after strange flesh. You know what that means. And setting forth an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So, when you are described as living in Sodom, when Sodom is described, that city, the one thing that comes to mind is nothing good at all is coming out of that city. It's all bad. It's all pitiful. It's all sinful. It is the worst of the worst. And what is interesting about the book of Jude, and I told you this before, the book of Jude is the last book that's written before the coming of Christ. Look what the world is in. Look what kind of shape the world is right before Jesus Christ comes. Again. Fornication, strange flesh, and an example of suffering, vengeance of the eternal flame. That's the kind of people, does that kind of look like the world we're living in? It does, doesn't it? And guess what happens in the next book of the Bible? God comes in and destroys basically almost everything. 1/4 of the population is going to be destroyed in an instant. Okay? Going back to Genesis. So that is the kind of place that Lot has chosen. But Brother Chris, it's got nice water, it's got green pastures. Looks like a great place to live. That is on the outside. That is eye appeal. That is what attracted Lot to that place. It's something that was pleasing to his eye. All right. Now, I'm just going to point out a few things. The 2 angels come, and Lot is sitting at the gate of Sodom, and the only way you can sit at a gate, and we know that this is a great city because it has a gate. And if you have a gate, guess what connects to a gate? A fence. And what is a fence? It's a wall. So this is a great city. And the only people that sat at gates at that time were judges, the people that made the laws. So what we have now with Lot is he is a lawmaker. He is basically, if you go to DeKalb County Courthouse or Marshall County Courthouse, and those guys that got those black robes on, that's what Lot is now. He is sitting there determining laws and determining the lives of people. So now we see that Lot has become a big man. Very important individual. So Lot is one of these people that are living among these individuals, and he is making the laws to, guess what, live by. And Lot seen them. Now there is just still enough righteousness in Lot. Because you remember we read that Lot was a person that day by day is kind of like grinding away at his righteousness, okay? Slowly but surely he is drifting further and further away from God. But thank God that there's still enough righteousness and just in Lot that he recognized who these two people are. I want you to look. And Lot, seeing them, arose and met them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Why is he going to do this? They're just guys. Because he knew who these people were. All right? Notice nobody else gets up and does this. It's only Lot. And he said, Behold, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into the servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet. You shall rise up early and go on your ways. And basically what he is saying is, if you lived back during this time in the Old Testament, if you came to a city and you didn't know anybody in that city, well, you had either one or two options. Somebody could show you kindness and come out and say, listen, I got an extra room. You're welcome to come stay with me. Or you could sleep out in the streets. And what we have described as Sodom, and we've described it pretty well, kept it very clean. But is this the type of city that you would want to stay on the streets at night? No, not at all. When we went down to New Orleans, we didn't go down Bourbon Street. I think it's Bourbon Street. Didn't go down there. But what was funny is people would come up, Chris, man, we went down Bourbon. You should go. That is the god-awfulest place I've ever seen. It is Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm like, why don't we go down there? You know, we've seen things we could not, you know. That is what they're living. That's what he's living in. Okay? He's basically saying you need to come to my house, stay there all night, and as soon as the sun rises, you need to go away. Because Lot knows the type of city that these people have journeyed into. All right? And go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street at night. And he pressed upon them greatly. You know what he's doing? He is begging them, do not stay in these streets. If it's that bad, all right? If it's that bad, why is Lot staying there? If Lot knows that this is the type of place that when the sun goes down, there's certain activities that happen that you do not want to stay in the streets, why has Lot still got his family there? Do you see how the world can pull you in? And there is something real interesting. There is a word in chapter, verse 2, that is the very first time it's mentioned. It is house. Men, as children of God, as Christians, we are described as travelers, right? And as a traveler, we do not have a permanent residence. We are traveling, looking for a city whose builder and maker is God. So we live in quote-unquote tents. Even the Apostle Peter says, I have a tent. It's going to be dissolved. Lot has now given up his tent, and he has found a permanent dwelling, a house. These bodies that we have are tents. They're not permanent dwellings. I live right down Canyon Road 52. That is my permanent earthly dwelling. But in spirituality, I am not a citizen of this world. You should not be a citizen of this world. Excuse me. So what Lot has done is he has made himself a citizen of Sodom. First time you say that word house. All right? Please don't stay in the streets. I know what happens in these streets, guys. You do not want to stay in these streets. He pressed on them greatly, and they turned unto him and entered into his house. Now, I want to show you something that is unusual. He made them a feast and baked them bread, and they did eat. And please don't holler women's lib and your male chauvinist. Whose job is that in the Old Testament? It's a woman's job. Why isn't she doing that? Do you see how he's just lost all, they've lost all respect for him. This was, please don't say that. This is a woman's job in the Old Testament. Okay? You do not see anything of her right now. He's doing everything. He's begging them to come in. He's going to wash their feet. He is going to bake their bread. He's going to do everything for them. He's got to get these guys out of this city as quickly as possible. And he is in a house. All right? Here we have Abraham living in a tent, worshiping God, building altars, and we got Lot living in a house, fearful for his life. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed on the house round, both young and old, all the people from every quarter, every one of them. Okay? And we're not going to really go into this. And they said unto Lot, bring them out. We want to know them. You know what that means. We want to know them. Because in the Old Testament, that word know means to be active with somebody. Okay, we're just going to leave it at that. And this is what he does. This is Lot. You still see some righteousness in him. There is a glimmer of hope for this guy. Okay? And Lot went out of the door and said unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Now, this just shows you the kind of environment that has happened. This just shows you how Lot has went from walking with Abraham, who is a type of Christ, not Christ, but a type of Christ, walking with Abraham, watching Abraham build altars, how everything has just totally turned upside down for this guy. I want you to look how he has gotten. I have 2 daughters which have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do whatever you want to with them. I mean, my God, why is he living there? I mean, if you really study this, and if you really dig into each verse, and I've tried, and this is sometimes you wish there were certain chapters in the Bibles that he just kind of left out. This is one of them, because this is gut-wrenching. How a man can say, I got 2 daughters. These girls are around 12 or 13 years old. Because we've already studied, and with Mary, it wasn't nothing unusual for a 14-year-old girl to be married and having babies. 12 or 13-year-old girls. Like he said, I got 2 of them, they're virgins. Y'all can do whatever you want to with and leave these guys alone. Now, do you see how just by looking, well, Sodom looks great. I mean, it's got lots of water, and it looks just like Egypt. That's what I want. Abraham, you go do what you want to. I don't need no altars. I don't need God. I don't need a tent. I need a permanent dwelling among these people. And they are sinful. They're wicked. That's fine. I'm going down here now. I'm a man of authority. I'm a man of position. I'm making laws. I'm passing laws. And now you see where it's got him. Okay? Now you're going to see God's grace. All throughout the Old Testament, this is God's grace is just scattered through all of it, and you're going to see it now. And when they said, "Stand back," okay, now it says, "But I have 2 daughters which have not known a man. Let me pray to bring them out to you, and you can do with them as good in your eyes." That's amazing. Only unto these men do nothing, for they therefore come under my shadow of my roof. And they said, "Stand back." And they said again, "This one fellow came to sojourn, and when he needs to be judged, now we will do worse with thee than with them." And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and they came near to break the door down. But the man put forth their hands and poured Lot to the house. You see God's grace. Okay? He's out with these people. Now you see how God is going to start drawing him back in, right? These are messengers of God. But you see how it is starting to draw Lot back. Okay? We see Lot is in the world. We see he is among these people. But now we can see how God is starting to pull him back. Alright? And they smote the men with blindness, and they wearied themselves at the door. You know the story. And this is what is interesting. Go to verse 13. "For we will destroy this place because the cry of them is waxing great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord had sent us to destroy it." Wait a minute. Didn't Abraham just agree with God? If there's 10 people down there, I won't destroy it. But it tells us here in verse 13, we are sent to destroy it. When these guys set out to go to Sodom, they knew, without a shadow of a doubt, there's nobody down there that's even more safe. We're going to get Lot and his family out, and we're going to destroy the rest of the city. They didn't go down there and preach any gospel, did they? You didn't see any street preaching, any amazing grace, just as I am. They go down there with one purpose and one purpose only: to deliver God's judgment and his wrath upon these people. Okay? And Lot went out and spake unto his son-in-laws, which had married his daughters. Now you see how things have happened. Now he's taken his daughters and he's allowed these to marry these people of this city. And this is what he says: "Get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." And as soon as he mentions the word Lord, guess what happens? They start to mock him. He has lost all respect in his family. They have no respect for him in the city. And it all starts with him turning his eyes towards Sodom, and that's exactly what I want. And it says, and when the morning arose, and the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. God is going to destroy the righteous with the unrighteous. He would have done that. If Lot would have said, no, I'm going to stay right here, God would have destroyed both of them together. Now this is interesting. And while he lingered. There's always parts of that world that's innocent. Just because you're a child of God, I want to quit right here. Just because you're a follower of Christ, which I think is amazing. I think it's great. It's the greatest thing in the world. The Apostle Paul also tells us there is another side in a person. There's like a war going on between the world and godliness. It is a constant pull. It's a constant pull. And there is a lingering inside of us. Stay out of church for a month. Just say 4 Sundays. Don't come on Wednesday or Sunday night. Just stay out. I promise you, in a year, you still won't be back. It is just like that. It is just, I'm going to just stay out. I'm not going to do this just one day, and eventually it gets easier, and it gets easier, and it gets easier. And you start to linger more and more and more in the world. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. Dear God, we know that there's a side of us that still want to be in the world and that still want to linger with the world. But dear God, we know there's a side of us, dear God, that's continuously drawing us to you. And we thank you, dear God, for that. Dear God, for this group that comes so faithfully every Wednesday night, dear God, I want to thank you for them. I want to thank you, dear God, for this church and for putting them in my life, dear God, a time when I needed them most. Dear God, for the prayer requests we heard, dear God, we lift them up to you. We love you and we thank you. In the name